Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera. Once again, I am at Aoyama Park today, making my second video here. As I said in my first video a few hours ago when I made it, it was quite a beautiful day here in Tokyo, and the sun has just gone down and it's a perfectly beautiful evening here in Tokyo, or early evening. I'm looking forward to later on and taking my dog for a walk around the park, as he is in obedience school today and he should be coming home in about an hour or so, and I'm curious to see if he's learned anything. It's quite a quiet day at the park, other than the airliners which are still passing overhead, practicing the new glide path to Haneda Airport. A lot of people in Tokyo are unhappy with the airplanes flying over the middle of the city, and there are countless complaints, mostly from the older people, which I am becoming one of, about the noise, particularly given the fact that there are almost no international commercial flights now, and many fewer I guess domestic flights, and no Olympics this summer. So people are saying, well, if you know, there are almost no flights, why do you keep flying planes over the city? Why don't you just make them fly where they normally fly? But I guess they are practicing against the day that things return to normal, and I hope that day comes back pretty soon. As I think I mentioned, this is my second video from the park today. I'd only planned to do one video, but after getting home and checking the mail, I found I had a box waiting for me, and inside the box was this camera, which a lot of you may recognize as a Canon A1 camera from the late 1970s and early 1980s. For those of you who've watched some of my earlier videos, I talked about this camera a little bit, and how this was the camera which generated my interest in photography. When I was a kid living in the middle of nowhere in the southwest of America, where everything was brown, and we had a black and white TV with only 2 channels, which shut off at around 11 o'clock or so in the evening, the only escape I had, at least into the world of color, was through National Geographic magazines. And I read these magazines all the time. They were what I spent hours. I could spend hours in a single day reading these. And one thing which I saw all the time in the back of these magazines were advertisements by the Canon camera company, and particularly advertisements for this camera. I remember seeing the beautiful pictures around the advertisement of tropical birds and flowers and things like that, and the beautiful camera which was photographed, or I guess pictured, beneath them. And I thought what it must be like to be a photographer for National Geographic magazine, traveling around the world with your Canon A1 camera and taking photos of all these beautiful things and seeing all these interesting people. It was just amazing to me. And yeah, it was a dream that kind of stuck with me, a memory which kind of burned in me even as my other interests in things changed. I could not afford such a camera in those days, when in a good month I might have $5 of my own, and all that $5 was spent on candy and soft drinks and comic books, and I certainly never saved any of it, and there was no way I could afford a Canon A1 with a lens in those days. So the camera remained a dream of mine for many years, and oh, here it is, like 40 years later, and wow, here it is. I finally have my Canon A1. So the Canon A1, when it was introduced in the late 70s, was a revelation. It was the most technologically advanced 35mm SLR of its day, and introduced a couple of the features which we now take for granted in SLR cameras. It was quite amazing. It just about everything about it was revolutionary. The most amazing thing that this added was the different shooting modes. Not only did you have manual mode and aperture priority mode, it also added shutter priority mode and program automatic mode. And if that wasn't enough, then there was a thing called a stop-down automatic mode, which allowed you to use this camera in automatic mode on the earlier FL lenses, which a lot of people still had in those days. Another interesting thing about this camera is, like the AE one, it featured plastic construction on the external parts of the body. The inside of the camera was still metal, but the exterior was made of plastic, the top and bottom covers, notedly. A lot of people didn't like a plastic-bodied camera, and they thought it was kind of a way for Canon to, cheapen things out or try to pad their profits or whatever. But when you think about it, it's actually a very good choice for top and bottom covers for a camera. The typical covers on cameras in those days were brass, stamped brass, or in the case of Leica cameras, they used zinc, and some other cameras used zinc as well. And these covers protected the cameras quite well. If you drop them, the brass or zinc cover dents a little bit, but it absorbs the shock, and the internal parts of the camera are usually okay. The only problem is when you drop one of these cameras in a particular way. Sometimes the metal dents enough to where it interferes with the operation of the camera. It presses against something it shouldn't press against. Most notably, if you drop it on the corner here by the winding lever, sometimes the metal pushes up and you find yourself unable to wind the camera, or it rubs when you wind it. So that's kind of a bad thing about metal covers. Whereas the plastic, when you drop it, it tends to absorb the shock. It might push in, but it generally pushes back out. Though it does leave marks when you drop one on a hard surface, which I know from experience, it tends not to cause any serious damage on the inside. It's quite a good idea, or a good material for the outside of a camera. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the features, the functions, and the controls of the Canon A1 as it's getting later and later, and it's getting darker and darker, and I hope I have enough light to finish this video, or that my new G7X Mark III works well in low light. So we'll go ahead and start at the top of the camera, and of course I always start here on the left side here with the film rewind knob. And under the film rewind knob we have the knob where, or I guess dial, where you set the film speed. We have a lot of film speed options available, and to set the film speed you would depress the little silver tab on the bottom of the dial and you simply turn it to the setting you like. On the opposite side we have exposure compensation, and to get that to turn you have to push this locking button that I'm pushing with my finger and turn the dial one way or other depending on how much compensation you would like. In front of that we have a battery check lamp. As you can see, the LED lights up when I push the battery check lamp switch. And below that we have a switch which turns off and on the display inside the camera. If you have one of these cameras and the display is not working, check the switch, it might be turned off. On the top here we have a hot shoe for the flash, and this allows for automatic operation with the older Canon automatic flashes. When you move over to the right side, this is where things begin to get a little interesting and complicated for some people, because this is where you set the various modes for operating the camera. On the very top here you have the shutter release button, this metal button with the hole in the middle which accepts a standard cable release. Below that you have a collar with two settings, and it goes from AV to TV. When you turn this dial, or I guess the switch, you'll see two different dials appear. When you switch it to AV, it shows kind of an orange or gold colored dial. When you switch it to TV, you get silver numbers. So AV stands for aperture value, and when you switch this to AV and turn the little dial here on the front, you can adjust the different apertures for the camera. When you switch it to TV, which means time value, when you turn the switch you are setting the shutter speeds. There's a little lock button under the front, so you want to make sure that you don't have that depressed, otherwise you won't be able to turn the dials. So we have aperture priority automatic and we have shutter priority automatic with these AV and TV settings, but you also have program automatic by simply switching it to TV and then turning the shutter speed dial past 1000 until the green P is exposed in the finder. So quite wonderful. And for manual shooting, you can operate the camera in manual mode by simply turning the aperture dial away from the automatic setting, usually it's a green mark on these lenses, and selecting an aperture on the lens, and then with the dial on the top selecting the shutter speed you wish to use, and you can operate the camera manually. And in automatic mode, I think in stop down automatic mode, you can use the stop down lever on the side here to stop it down, and there's kind of a memory switch which holds it in place. We have a couple of buttons over here, and one of these things, you have like an exposure preview, which allows you to see what for example, when it's stopped down, and then you have memory, and you push this, and I guess the camera will memorize the exposure settings. On the other side here, we have a grip which you remove by taking off this screw or loosening this screw, and underneath that you find the battery chamber. And these cameras will use a 4LR44 or 4SR44 battery, which you can find on Amazon or in camera shops. They're still produced today, and they're not expensive. Oh, and I forgot to mention the film counter dial is located right here, kind of in a small spot below the controls here for the, the mode selection switch. The viewfinder here is dovetailed, so you can use a Canon eye cup on it or slide on diopter correction pieces. And we have a eyepiece shutter or viewfinder shutter here, which closes off and prevents light from getting in case you are shooting with a cable release and tripod and your eye isn't blocking off the light when you're not standing behind the camera. On the bottom here we have a tripod socket located in the center, and it will accept a standard 1/4-inch tripod. We have some electrical contacts on this side for using a motor drive, and over here we have the access cover, which you must remove when attaching the motor drive. You remove this and put on the motor drive, and this camera will give you up to 5 frames per second using the motor drive system. Now, when I was young and I thought cameras were really cool machines, I really loved motor drives. I thought they were super awesome, and the sound was really cool. It's like my first car when I tried running it with open headers and no exhaust on it. It certainly sounded cool, but I wouldn't drive something like that nowadays. And nowadays I don't really like to have a film camera or an old Pro SLR camera with a motor drive on it. I don't really like the noise anymore. And also it adds a lot of heft and weight to cameras, which are all pretty much already hefty and weighty. I really like this camera. I was surprised when I got it in the condition it was. These cameras have become very popular in Japan over the last 5 or 10 years, and the prices have gone up quite steeply on them. There was a time when these things you could buy them for $10 or $20 and in working condition, but now they're going for many times that amount, because it was really a wonderful camera for its time, and it's still a relevant camera today. The one weakness these cameras have is something called, shutter squeak, which is actually a mirror squeak. And there's kind of a damper which damps the movement of the mirror or something like that, and the lubricant dries up over time and it causes the shutter to squeak. It's possible I hear it on this, but if I am hearing it, it's incredibly faint. It's not as loud as I hear on some of these cameras. It's not a fatal flaw to these cameras. The camera still works well despite the squeak on the inside. And it's not so difficult. Well, maybe it is difficult for a lot of people to try to fix the squeak. It involves kind of removing the top cover and applying oil strategically with a syringe. So maybe not a homebrew repair there, but something which is fixable. And you probably find someone somewhere, a shop somewhere, which can repair your squeaky shutter if you have an A1 or an AE one which has the problem. Most of the AE ones I come across have noisy shutters, but the squeaky shutter is a lot less noisy than running a motor drive than with one of these cameras. So as long as the shutter is working accurately, I don't really care if it squeaks or not. I guess that's about it for the video here. It's getting really late. I got to get back and be prepared for when the dog comes home and I take him for a walk. It's a very wonderful night here. I hope it continues to be wonderful. I hope it's wonderful where you are. I'll be posting more videos from Japan about vintage Japanese cameras and photography in general. If you're interested in seeing these, please subscribe. This camera I may or may not be listing for sale in my online stores or my Etsy or eBay store. I sell vintage Japanese cameras there. If you're interested in buying a vintage Japanese camera, please check out my stores. I'll put links to my stores in the description below the video. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.